Now that we have our lightsaber effects in our fight scene, we need to make some sort of effect for when our lightsabers hit or clash each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to use an effect built right into After Effects. It's called lens flare. So to do this, we need to go up to Layer, and we have to click New, and we're going to make a new solid. For this one, it can be the comp size, so click Make Comp Size, or the size of the composition. And I'm going to call this one lens flare, because that's the effect we're going to use. Like this, lens flare. And then it can be black, and we're going to hit OK. So our layer's on top of our video, and we can't see anything, so we're going to change the mode to add again. And just so that I don't accidentally move any of these lightsabers around, I'm going to lock my lightsaber layers, just so that I don't accidentally make a mistake. Now, what we're going to do here is I'm actually going to turn the lightsaber layers off, and I'm going to look for the frame where I feel like they hit for the first time. So I think right here is probably a good frame. So right here is where I feel like they hit for the first time. So I'm going to go to Effect, and I'm going to go to Generate. I'm going to choose Lens Flare. Make sure you're on your lens flare layer. So I'm going to go to Generate, and I'm going to create a lens flare. Now, a lens flare is basically light that reflects off of the edges of your elements in the lens, and that's why you get these weird circle patterns. But it does look really nice. Like when two lightsabers hit, they're going to generate a lot of light, so we're going to put a lens flare there. Again, we can twirl down into the effects here, and we can adjust the effects of the lens flare, or we can adjust them up here. And what we want to work with is the flare center and the flare brightness. So I'm going to stopwatch both of those and keyframe it. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to grab the center of the lens flare, and I'm going to put it right where the two lightsabers hit. And you can see that the lens flare kind of generates back that way. Some students have told me they don't like how bright this lens flare is, so decide what your brightness is going to be when they hit. If it's going to be 75 every time they hit, change it to 75. If it's going to be 50% every time they hit, change it to 50. That's totally up to you. I'm going to work with 75%. So now that I've told it it's going to be 75% brightness and where the flare center is, what we want to do is we actually need to go to the frame right before these hit. So I'm going to press page up, which is going to move me one frame to before they hit. Now it doesn't look like a whole lot has happened, and these guys filmed in slow motion, so each frame has very little difference in it. But right before these hit, what I want to do is I want to set the brightness to 0. And so what will happen is, this is the frame right before they hit, and if I press page down, here's the frame where they do hit. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press page down until I feel like they're done hitting. And I might even turn off this lens flare layer for a second so I can see it. So I'm pressing page down here, and I feel like they separate right about here. And so on this layer, I'm going to turn lens flare back on. This is the layer where they separate. So right here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put its lens flare right there. And because they're separating right there, I'm going to set the lens flare brightness to 0. And now I just want to show you what happens yet. We're not quite done, but this is what happens. So now, this whole time they're hitting here, I need to move the center because the center kind of moves, After Effects moves it there. But do you notice that the lens flare gets duller and duller and duller or less bright the whole time? That's because After Effects is calculating what each frame should be to reduce it to 0 when I get here. So what I want to do is I want to go to where it's at 0, and I want to press page up. So I go to the frame right before. So this is the frame where I want them to still be hitting. This is the last frame they're hitting on. And right now my frame brightness is at 2% because that's what After Effects thinks it should be to make it fade out. I'm going to click on that and change that to 75%. So now the whole time here that they're hitting, it's at 75%. Now, the other problem I have is that this center point isn't always where I want it to be. So I'm just going to go and press page down and move the center point exactly where I think it should go. And so I'm just pressing page down and making my small adjustments here, just like this. And so, after I add all these keyframes here, what I'll have, and we're almost there. Again, these guys filmed in slow motion, so they have a lot of frames in between here. You may not have this many frames on your video. But so now what's going to happen here is right when I get to here, when they're not touching anymore, now I don't have to move the center anymore. And now I'm just pressing page down, and what can happen here is now we need to look for the next time that they hit, and they hit right about here. And so again, I would do the exact same thing. You don't need a different lens flare for each clash. You just need to move the center, and then you turn your brightness back to 75. So now right here, let's say this is where they're going to hit again. I'm going to move my center down there. I'm going to turn my brightness back to 75% because that's where they should hit. I'm going to press page up so that in one frame before they're hitting, and you see again, After Effects thinks that it should fade from here to here. So its brightness is now 74%. Yours might be different. I'm going to turn that to 0. So now this whole time that they're not hitting, there's no lens flare on the screen, and now there is. And then the whole time they're hitting down here, which is probably to somewhere about here, I'm going to set the lens flare to 75 again, and that did nothing. So I'm going to press page down. Here's where I feel like they're not hitting anymore. I'm going to set that to 0. I'm going to press page up because now I'm going, this is the last frame where I think they're hitting. And After Effects thinks that should be at 3%, but I want that at 75%. So now all I have to do is go back through and make sure that the center is kind of where it should be. So here I'm just pressing a lot of page down. So right now I have that lens flare showing up. So now here's what we got. We have clashes where they should be hitting. Let's turn on all our layers so we can see what's going on. So I'm going to collapse this, turn these all back on. I'm just going to scrub through here. So now I'm going to scrub through, and now I have a lens flare where they hit, and that lens flare moves around with it. And now when they hit down here, I have another lens flare. So that's just one way that you can make your lightsaber clash effect in After Effects.